Ever get that feeling like your brain's got its own agenda? Like it's making decisions without asking you first?
Oh, all the time.
We're going to unpack that today.
Yeah.
We're doing a deep dive into the mind, or more specifically, Daniel Kahneman's thinking, fast and slow.
One of the best.
It's a classic.
Oh, yeah.
And we've got a great summary of it here.
Awesome.
And what we really want to do is pull out the most useful, practical stuff for you.
Yeah, like how to use this.
So you can make better decisions. Right. Because that's what it's all about, not just understanding how the brain works, but actually using that knowledge.
Especially these days, right? I mean, information's coming at us from every direction.
It is.
How do we handle it?
So we're going to learn how to think better, not harder.
Love that.
And at the heart of all this, in Kahneman's work, is this idea of two systems of thinking.
Two systems, yeah. It's almost like having two brains in one.
It really is. It really is.
They're working together, but they're not always on the same page, which is where things get interesting.
For sure. For sure.
It's kind of messy sometimes.
It's definitely messy.
So let's break it down.
Okay.
We've got system one, which is your fast, intuitive, automatic system. It's the one that operates on gut feelings, first impressions.
Like autopilot.
Exactly, autopilot. It's what allows you to recognize a face instantly or know that 2 + 2 = 4 without even thinking about it.
Effortless.
Boom, there it is. No effort required. But then we've got system two, and this is the more deliberate analytical system.
Like a thinker.
Yeah, the thinker, the one that kicks in when you're solving a complex problem, like, say, 17 times 24.
Oh, I'd need a calculator for that one.
Probably most of us would, right? That's system two. It takes effort, it's slower, but it's also more logical and rational.
And that feeling of having to think hard, that's system two flexing its muscles.
Totally. It's like a mental workout.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing. These two systems, they're not separate parts of the brain.
It's not like left brain, right brain.
Exactly. It's more like two different modes of operating, two different ways of processing information.
And they're both essential, right? We need both of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
System one is great for quick judgments, keeping us safe in familiar situations. But system two is crucial when we need to slow down, analyze, make considered decisions.
So it's all about knowing when to use which system.
And that's what this deep dive is all about, giving you the tools to recognize what's happening in your own mind and make the most of both systems.
I love that.
All right, so we've got these two systems. System one, always on, generating impressions, intuitions.
Yeah, it's working in the background all the time.
Constantly. And system two, well, it likes to conserve energy.
It's a bit lazy.
Bit lazy.
Yeah.
It only steps in when it absolutely has to, which means that a lot of the time we're running on system one.
Autopilot.
Autopilot.
Mm.
And that could be a good thing. It's efficient. But it also means we're prone to certain biases and errors in thinking.
Because system one isn't always right, is it?
Nope, not always. It relies on shortcuts, on heuristics, which are basically rules of thumb that help us make quick judgments.
Like mental shortcuts.
Exactly. And these shortcuts can be incredibly useful in many situations, but they can also lead us astray.
So how do we know when we're being tricked by our own brains?
Well, that's where understanding these biases comes in. Let's start with a classic example, the bat and ball problem.
Okay, I think I've heard of this one.
A bat and a ball cost $1.10 total.
Okay.
The bat costs $1 more than the ball.
Okay.
How much does the ball cost?
10 cents.
10 cents. That's what most people say. It feels right, it's intuitive,
Yeah.
but it's wrong.
Oh, really?
Think about it. If the ball costs 10 cents and the bat costs $1 more, then the bat would cost $1.10.
Right.
And together they would cost $1.20. That doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't.
The correct answer is 5 cents for the ball and $1.05 for the bat.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see it now.
That's system one at work, jumping to a quick, easy answer.
Mm-hmm.
But if you engage system two, do the math, you catch the error.
So we're tricked by our own intuition.
Exactly. And this happens all the time in all sorts of situations. That's why it's so important to understand these biases so we can recognize them and make more rational choices.
So let's talk about some more of these mental shortcuts, these heuristics.
Let's dive in.
Okay.
One of the most common is the availability heuristic.
What's that?
It's basically the idea that we judge the likelihood of something happening based on how easily we can recall examples of it.
Oh, so if I can easily think of examples of something, I think it's more likely to happen.
Exactly. For example, if you've just seen a news report about a plane crash, you might suddenly feel like flying is incredibly dangerous, even though statistically it's one of the safest modes of transportation.
Because that one vivid example is right there in your mind.
Front and center. The media plays a huge role in this. They often focus on dramatic, unusual events, which makes them more available in our memory even if they're not statistically representative.
So our perception of risk gets skewed.
Totally. And this can affect our behavior, how we make decisions. We might avoid activities that we perceive as risky, even if they're actually quite safe.
So we're not making decisions based on facts, but on feelings.
Often, yes. That's why it's so important to be aware of this bias, to challenge our assumptions, and to look at the data, not just our gut feelings.
And this ties into another concept that Kahneman talks about, anchoring.
Oh yeah, anchoring. That's a powerful one.
Tell me about it.
It's the idea that we tend to get fixated on the first piece of information we encounter, even if it's totally irrelevant.
Like an anchor weighing us down.
Exactly. And this anchor then influences all our subsequent judgments and decisions. For example, imagine you're negotiating a salary for a new job.
Oh, I hate that.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
And the employer throws out an initial offer that's way below what you were hoping for.
Ugh. Yeah, the worst.
That number, that lowball offer, it becomes an anchor.
Even if it's completely unreasonable?
Even if it is, it sets a reference point, and all your subsequent negotiations are going to be influenced by that initial number.
So even if I managed to negotiate a higher salary, it might still be lower than what I could have gotten if they'd started with a more reasonable offer?
That's the power of anchoring. It can subtly shape our perceptions of value, of fairness, of what's possible.
So we need to be aware of these anchors and not let them hold us back.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to challenge those initial numbers, to do your research, and to know your worth.
Good advice. And then there's representativeness.
Ah, yes. This is all about stereotypes.
Tell me more.
Well, it's the tendency to judge the probability of something belonging to a certain category based on how well it fits our mental image of that category.
So if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it must be a duck.
Kind of, but not always.
Yeah.
The problem is that we often ignore base rates, the statistical probability of something occurring.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. Imagine you meet someone who's very shy, loves books, and wears glasses. What's your first thought?
Librarian.
Probably. It fits the stereotype, right? But statistically, there are far more truck drivers in the world than librarians.
Right, of course.
So even though this person might seem like a typical librarian, it's actually more likely statistically that they're a truck driver.
Because there are just so many more truck drivers out there.
Exactly. But we tend to ignore those base rates and focus on how well something fits our mental model.
So we jump to conclusions based on stereotypes.
We do. And that can lead to all sorts of biases and errors in judgment, especially when it comes to things like hiring decisions or social interactions.
So we need to be careful about making assumptions based on limited information.
Absolutely. Always consider the bigger picture, the statistical probabilities, not just the surface level impressions.
And that leads us nicely into the conjunction fallacy.
Oh, this was a classic.
Yeah.
It's the idea that we tend to think that two events happening together is more likely than one event happening on its own.
Really? That doesn't make sense.
Logically, it doesn't, but intuitively, it often feels right. The classic example is the Linda problem.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations.
Okay, so Linda sounds like a pretty passionate person.
She does. Now, which is more probable? A, Linda is a bank teller. Or B, Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement.
I'd say B, she sounds like she'd be a feminist.
That's what most people say. But statistically, it's more likely that she's just a bank teller. The probability of two events happening together can never be higher than the probability of one event happening on its own.
Oh, right. Because she could be a bank teller who's not a feminist.
Exactly. But we get tricked by the story, by how well the second option fits our mental image of Linda.
So the more details we add, the more convincing it sounds, even if it's less likely.
Precisely. And this happens in real life all the time. We create elaborate stories, narratives that feel plausible, but might not be based on solid evidence.
So we need to be wary of those compelling narratives.
Yes. Always check the facts, the probabilities, before jumping to conclusions.
Great advice. And now we come to a really fascinating part. The power of stories.
Oh yeah, stories. They're incredibly powerful.
More powerful than statistics.
Often, yes. Our brains are wired for stories. We remember them better, they evoke stronger emotions, and they're more persuasive than cold, hard data.
So a good story can trump a mountain of evidence.
It can. Think about how we make decisions about our health. We might read all the research about a particular treatment, but a single anecdote, A story from a friend or family member can sway us in a completely different direction.
Because that story feels real, it feels personal.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be aware of the power of stories, to recognize that they can be misleading, and to always consider the broader context, the statistical evidence.
So stories are powerful, but they're not always the whole truth.
Right. They can be a starting point, a way to spark curiosity, but we should never base important decisions solely on anecdotal evidence.
Always check the facts.
Always check the facts. And speaking of facts, let's talk about regression to the mean.
Okay, what's that?
It's a statistical phenomenon, and it's one that we often misunderstand.
I'm intrigued.
Basically, it means that extreme events tend to be followed by more average events.
So if I have a really good day, the next day is likely to be more average.
Exactly. And the same goes for bad days. But we often misinterpret this as cause and effect.
Give me an example.
Sure. Imagine a student gets an unusually high score on a test.
Okay.
The next time they take a test, they're likely to get a score that's closer to their average. But they might think, oh, I didn't study as hard this time, or the test was harder, when in reality, it's just regression to the mean.
So we attribute it to some external factor when it's just statistical probability.
Exactly. And this can lead to all sorts of faulty conclusions. We might think a particular intervention is effective, when in reality, it's just a natural fluctuation.
So we need to be careful about drawing conclusions from limited data.
Absolutely. Always consider the bigger picture, the long-term trends, not just the immediate results.
So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. We've talked about the two systems of thinking, the various heuristics and biases that shape our judgments, and the power of stories and regression to the mean.
It's been fascinating.
It has. And the key takeaway here is this. Understanding how our minds work, how we make decisions, is crucial for navigating the world effectively.
Because we're constantly bombarded with information, with choices.
We are. And if we're not aware of these biases, we can easily be misled, make decisions that aren't in our best interest.
So we need to be more mindful, more deliberate in our thinking.
Exactly. And that's where System 2 comes in. We need to learn to engage that slower, more analytical system, especially when the stakes are high.
So it's not about getting rid of System 1, it's about knowing when to bring in System 2.
That's it. It's about finding the right balance between intuition and analysis, between speed and accuracy.
And that's something we can all work on.
Absolutely. It's a lifelong journey, but it's one that's well worth taking.
So there you have it, folks, a deep dive into the fascinating world of thinking.
And hopefully some tools that you can use to make better, more informed decisions in your own life.
Absolutely. And we'll leave you with this question to ponder. What if you started paying more attention to those moments when your intuition is telling you one thing, but logic might be suggesting something else? What if you slowed down, engaged that System 2 thinking, and really examined the evidence before making a choice?
It's a simple shift in mindset, but it could have a profound impact on the decisions you make and the life you create.
Food for thought.
Indeed.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep thinking critically and keep diving deep.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.